Hi, my name is Madison. I am a 20, and if someone had told me a year ago that I would be sitting in my childhood home surrounded by four screaming children under the age of 8, waiting for social services to arrive, I would have laughed in their face. I have always been the good daughter. When my mother passed away from breast cancer when I was 12, my world completely changed. My father threw himself into work, pulling 12-hour shifts as an HVAC technician just to keep the lights on and food on the table. I grew up quickly, learning how to cook, clean, and take care of myself without much guidance because my father was either working or completely exhausted. I never resented him for that. He was doing his best, and I loved him deeply for all of his sacrifices. 5 years ago, when my father met and married Carla, I was 15. She came into the picture with two children from a previous relationship, Mason and Ella, who were toddlers at the time. I remember sitting at the kitchen table the night Dad introduced us, watching Carla smile sweetly at him while adjusting Mason's shirt and thinking that she seemed like someone who would take care of him. I wanted him to be happy, so I tried my best to like her, even though she was not the warmest person to me. I welcomed her kids, read bedtime stories to them, and helped them adjust to living in our house. Over the years, Carla and my father had two more kids together, Harper and baby Liam. Suddenly, the house was full of crying, chaos, and toys scattered everywhere. I was a teenager trying to navigate high school, but I spent my afternoons and weekends helping with homework, babysitting, and cooking dinner while my father worked overtime to support the growing family. I even got a part-time job at a local grocery store when I turned 16, and most of my paycheck went toward things my step-siblings needed. I bought school supplies, shoes, and snacks because I could not stand seeing them go without. But as the years went on, it became clear that Carla did not see me as her daughter. She would make cutting remarks like, "You are so independent, you don't need me," or she would post family photos on Facebook where I was mysteriously absent, captioning them, "My beautiful family." It hurt, but I told myself it did not matter because I had always been strong on my own. Still, she never had any issue leaning on me for free childcare. What started as watching the kids for a couple of hours here and there quickly turned into entire weekends where I would be responsible for all four children while she ran errands or had appointments. My father was completely oblivious because he worked Saturdays at a warehouse for extra money and Carla presented it as helping family, so I felt guilty saying no. I convinced myself that I was just being a good daughter and sister. By the time I started college, I was burned out. I commuted from home to save money, but weekends were no longer mine. While my classmates went out to parties or studied at the library, I was at home changing diapers, breaking up fights, and trying to keep the kids entertained. I thought if I kept my head down and helped, things would get better, but instead, Carla took it as a given that I was available anytime she wanted. Everything came to a breaking point one Friday night in the spring. I had an intense exam week coming up, so I told Carla that I would not be able to watch the kids that weekend. I was nervous to tell her because she had a habit of pouting or acting like I was letting her down, but she just shrugged and said, "That's fine. I'll figure something out." I felt relieved, thinking maybe she finally understood. The next morning, I was still in bed when I heard loud knocking at the front door. Groggy and confused, I stumbled downstairs to find Mason, Ella, Harper, and baby Liam all standing there in pajamas, clutching backpacks and a diaper bag. Carla's SUV was already reversing out of the driveway. I called her immediately, my voice shaking, and asked what she was doing. She said, completely unfazed, "You'll be fine. I'll be back Sunday night. I need some me time." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stood there in shock, for kids staring up at me, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I was 20 years old, barely able to afford my own groceries, and now I was suddenly responsible for four children under the age of 8 for an entire weekend with no warning. I took a deep breath, ushered them inside, and tried to stay calm. I checked the fridge and realized I barely had enough food to make a decent breakfast, but I managed to whip up some pancakes with the last of my eggs and milk. I remember Mason wrinkling his nose and saying he wanted his favorite cereal, and Ella managed to spill an entire cup of milk on the floor while Harper screamed because she wanted to watch cartoons. Liam cried in his high chair, red-faced and inconsolable. I was running on fumes and caffeine by noon, already regretting every choice that had led me to this moment. I texted Carla, demanding she come back immediately, but she ignored me. I called my father, but he was at work and did not answer. By Sunday afternoon, I was exhausted and on edge. I tried to keep the kids entertained, but they were restless and cranky. Then Harper, always a ball of energy, tripped while running through the living room and slammed her forehead on the coffee table. The cut was small but bled heavily, and I completely panicked. I called Carla again, no answer. I called my father, still no answer. My hands were shaking as I cleaned Harper's cut and tried to calm her down. I felt trapped and helpless, so I called the non-emergency number for our local police department and explained that I had been left alone with 4 kids without warning, that I was their stepsister, and that I needed help. A social worker named Stephanie showed up about an hour later. She was calm and kind, kneeling down to talk to Harper and check her head. She asked me questions about the situation, and when I explained that my stepmother had dropped them off and disappeared for the weekend, Stephanie's expression hardened. She stayed with me for 3 hours, helping me care for the kids and filing a report. She reassured me that I had done the right thing by calling for help, and I felt tears sting my eyes because for the first time in years, someone was treating me like I mattered. When my father finally got off work and saw the dozens of missed calls from me, he rushed home. He arrived just as the county vehicle was pulling out of the driveway. He barely said hello before launching into a tirade, demanding to know what I had done. When I told him I had called for help because I had been abandoned with his children, he accused me of making things worse and embarrassing him in front of the neighbors. I stood there, speechless, while he yelled, his face red with anger. Carla waltzed in late that night, unapologetic, saying she needed a mental health break and acting as if I had completely overreacted. When I shouted at her for dumping her kids on me without warning, she sneered and said, "You're practically their sister. Why wouldn't you help out?" I had spent years swallowing my feelings, keeping the peace, and putting everyone else first, but something in me snapped that night. I told her I was not their third parent and that I was done being treated like free childcare. Carla called me selfish. My father stood there in silence, refusing to defend me. That was the moment I realized I had no place in this house anymore. I went upstairs, packed a bag, and texted my best friend Mia to ask if I could stay with her. Within an hour, I was out of that house and at Mia's apartment, where she hugged me and told me I deserved better. I sent my father a message letting him know I was safe, but would not be coming back until they sorted out their lives. His response came hours later. "You abandoned your family. Don't expect help from me." I stared at the message for a long time before I quietly blocked him. 3 weeks after I left my father's house, I thought I could finally breathe again. I was sleeping on an air mattress in Mia's spare room, working every shift I could get and cramming for finals, but at least I wasn't waking up to crying toddlers or being berated by Carla. Life was chaotic but peaceful in a strange way. Then Mia's mom, who is friends with one of our neighbors back home, called me over one evening with some news. She said that Carla's ex, Mason, and Ella's father had heard about the CPS report. He had filed for emergency custody of his 2 kids, and it sounded like this wasn't the first time Carla had been reported for leaving her children unattended. Hearing that didn't shock me. Carla has always been overwhelmed, careless, and more concerned with herself than anyone else. But it made my stomach turn thinking about Mason and Ella being shuffled around between adults who treated them like burdens. When I found out, I sent my dad a short message telling him I wasn't sorry. He called me immediately, furious, saying that I had aired family business to strangers and ruined their lives. I told him that if he wouldn't protect his own kids, then someone had to. He didn't like hearing that, and after a tense silence, he hung up on me. Carla started posting on Facebook about betrayal, fake family, and snakes in her life. Vague statuses clearly aimed at me. I refused to take the bait. I didn't comment, didn't reach out, didn't explain myself. I was done trying to prove I was a good daughter or sister to people who never treated me like family. Instead, I threw myself into building a life of my own. Mia and I started apartment hunting, which was terrifying. I had been living at home rent-free for years, and suddenly I was looking at leases and security deposits with a bank account that barely had 3 digits. But I was determined. We eventually found a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in an older building. It wasn't much thin walls, a view of the parking lot, and an ancient stove that smelled faintly of burnt toast, but it was ours. Rent was $1,200, and I was terrified of committing to that kind of responsibility, but Mia's mom believed in me enough to co-sign. I scraped together my half of the deposit and promised myself that no matter how hard it got, I wouldn't go back home. Life became a blur of exhaustion. I was a full-time student carrying a heavy course load, and I picked up every shift my boss would give me at the grocery store. Some weeks I worked 45 hours on top of classes, juggling everything with a color-coded planner and a lot of caffeine. I budgeted down to the penny. My meals consisted mostly of instant noodles, rice, and frozen vegetables. I walked to work and school to save on gas, even when it rained or snowed. I stopped buying coffee, stopped eating out, and learned to patch up my thrift store shoes instead of replacing them. I was tired all the time, but for the first time in my life, I felt safe. I locked the door to my own apartment at night, and no one could dump their problems on me without asking. Carla's cryptic posts grew more dramatic. From what I heard through neighbors, she was struggling. Her ex's custody petition for Mason and Ella was moving forward, and there were whispers that she might lose primary custody altogether. I thought about those kids constantly. I hoped their dad would provide some stability because they deserved so much more than the chaos they'd grown up in. I also worried about Harper and Liam because I knew Carla's carelessness wasn't reserved for Mason and Ella. I wanted to check on them, but I couldn't bring myself to reach out to Carla or my dad. I knew if I opened that door, I'd get sucked right back into their drama, and I had worked too hard to escape it. Then one night, while I was on my dinner break at work, my phone buzzed. It was my father. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer, but something in my gut told me I should. I stepped outside into the chilly parking lot, surrounded by carts and the glow of fluorescent lights, and answered. His voice was hoarse and shaky. He said, "Your stepmother left. She took Harper and the baby and went to her sister's house. I don't know if she's coming back." My heart dropped. He sounded so small, so broken, like all the weight of the past few years had finally crushed him. He told me he was overwhelmed and begged me to come home and help him. I stood there in my grocery store apron, the smell of fryer oil clinging to me, and felt torn in half. I wanted to rush to him. He was my dad, the man who worked himself to the bone for me after my mom died, the man who taught me to ride a bike and fixed every scraped knee I ever had. But I also remembered all the times he let Carla treat me like free childcare, all the times he turned a blind eye when she excluded me, all the times I cried in my room feeling like a stranger in my own home. I remembered the night I called for help because I was overwhelmed and scared, and he came home furious at me instead of thanking me for protecting his kids. I remembered packing my bag and leaving, and his text accusing me of abandoning my family. I took a deep breath and told him no. I told him I loved him, but I couldn't come back. I told him I wasn't sacrificing my life again after years of being taken for granted. He started crying right there in the parking lot, saying he didn't know what to do. Hearing him cry broke something in me, but I knew if I gave in, I'd be stuck in that cycle forever. I stood there with my phone pressed to my ear, tears streaming down my face, and said I wasn't moving back home. He cried harder, and I repeated it. It broke my heart, but I stood my ground. 2 months later, I got a call from one of the neighbors back home, and my heart sank before she even finished speaking. CPS had stepped in again. This time, it was Harper and Liam. From what I could piece together, Carla had left them unattended at her sister's house while she went out for the evening, and something happened that warranted the police being called. No one would give me every detail, but I heard enough to know it was bad. The kids were removed from Carla's custody and placed in temporary foster care. I sat in my tiny apartment holding my phone, staring at the wall, feeling numb. Mason and Ella were already living full-time with their father, who had been granted full custody after his petition went through, and now Harper and Liam were with strangers. I thought back to that weekend when Carla dumped them all on me without warning, and it hit me like a punch in the chest that I might have been the only adult in their lives who had tried to protect them. When I found out, I called my dad. His voice was slurred, and I could hear a television blaring in the background. He said Carla had taken off completely and that he had no idea where she was. He sounded wrecked, like he was unraveling at the seams. Over the next few weeks, he spiraled hard. He started calling me every night, his voice thick with alcohol, begging me to come home and help him get through everything. He kept repeating that we needed to be a family again, that he couldn't do this without me. I would listen, tears stinging my eyes, but every time I told him the same thing, I'd visit, but I wasn't moving back in. I had finally gotten out, and I wasn't going to sacrifice myself again to fix a situation I didn't create. The first time I visited after everything happened, it was like walking into a nightmare. The house I grew up in, the house where my mother once filled the kitchen with the smell of her famous cinnamon rolls, looked like a stranger's home. There were piles of laundry spilling out of baskets, stacks of unopened mail and unpaid bills on the counter, and beer bottles scattered on the coffee table and kitchen counters. The carpets were stained, toys were left where the kids had last played with them months ago, and the air smelled like a mix of stale alcohol and old takeout. My father sat in his recliner looking like a ghost of himself, thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes and a beard that had grown wild. I spent the whole afternoon trying to bring some order to the chaos. I gathered the trash, wiped down surfaces, and started a load of laundry. I tried to help him sort through the bills, organizing them into piles and showing him which ones were urgent. He followed me around, quiet and embarrassed, mumbling apologies. I could feel the weight of his shame pressing down on both of us. At one point, he asked me outright if I would just move back home, if I could stay there to help him get back on his feet. My heart broke because I could see how desperate he was, but I told him no. I told him I loved him, but I wasn't going to be his crutch. He needed therapy and real support, not me sacrificing everything I'd worked for. Driving back to my apartment that night, my chest felt heavy, like I was carrying the weight of every choice I'd made in the past few months. I unlocked the door, sank onto my thrifted couch, and cried until my eyes ached. I felt like I had lost my entire family. My mother was gone. Carla had burned every bridge with me, and now my siblings were scattered between foster care and their father's house. My dad was a shell of the man I remembered. I felt completely alone, like I had walked away from the wreckage of a car crash only to find myself stranded in the middle of nowhere. But Mia was there. She found me curled up on the couch with a blanket pulled over my head and gently reminded me of the truth I kept forgetting. I had saved those kids from worse. My decision to call for help months ago had set everything in motion. Because of that, Mason and Ella were living safely with their dad, and Harper and Liam were out of Carla's care before something even worse could happen. Mia told me I wasn't heartless. I was brave. I wasn't abandoning my family. I was breaking a cycle. I clung to her words like a lifeline, because deep down I knew she was right. I had done what I needed to do to protect those kids, even if it cost me the family I had always tried to hold together. That kept me going. It has been a full year since that weekend from hell, the weekend that shattered my illusion of family and forced me to grow up faster than I ever imagined. When I look back on it now, it feels surreal, like watching a movie where I was both the protagonist and the villain, depending on whose perspective you take. Carla ended up losing custody of Harper and Liam permanently. After months of hearings, supervised visits that she consistently missed, and reports from social workers, the court decided it was best for the kids to be placed permanently with their foster family. From what I've heard through neighbors and occasional updates, they're thriving. The family that took them in is stable, loving, and fully invested in giving them the kind of childhood they never would have had with Carla. The foster family eventually adopted them, and though it hurts knowing they may not even remember me when they're older, it's a good kind of hurt. It means they're safe, and I did my part to make sure of that. Mason and Ella are living full-time with their dad now, and they're doing better than anyone could have hoped. He enrolled them in a great school district, and they're both involved in sports and activities. From what I've seen on social media, they look happy, relaxed, and like kids who finally get to be kids. Their father sends me occasional updates, pictures of school plays and soccer games, and it makes me smile every time. It's proof that getting the authorities involved wasn't an overreaction, no matter what my father and Carla accused me of back then. As for Carla, she disappeared. I have no idea where she is, and I don't care. She stopped posting her dramatic Facebook statuses months ago, and no one has heard from her in a long time. I used to wonder if she felt remorse, if she stayed up at night regretting her choices, but therapy taught me that it doesn't matter. Some people aren't capable of reflecting on the pain they cause. She lost her children, but she also lost every ounce of trust and respect anyone had for her. That's not my burden to carry. My relationship with my father is complicated. We talk occasionally, but there's a distance between us that wasn't there before. I think he finally realizes how much damage Carla caused, not just to the kids, but to me. He's tried to apologize in his own awkward way, but there's a deep layer of shame in his voice every time we talk. I can hear the regret when he asks how I'm doing or if I've been eating enough. He'll never say it outright, but I think he hates himself for not protecting me, for letting Carla turn me into a built-in babysitter and a punching bag. Part of me wants to forgive him completely, to erase the resentment I carry, but healing isn't linear. I love him, but I can't pretend I trust him the way I used to. He has his own demons to face, and I'm not his therapist, nor his savior. Life looks different for me now. I'm in my final year of college, and I finally switched from working those exhausting grocery store shifts to a part-time job at a local bookstore. It pays less, but it gives me the peace I didn't realize I needed. The smell of books, the quiet hum of customers browsing, and the steady rhythm of stocking shelves feel like therapy in their own way. I've gotten better at budgeting, learning how to stretch every dollar while still allowing myself little treats, coffee with Mia, a thrifted dress I actually like, or the occasional takeout when I'm too exhausted to cook. My apartment feels like a home now, filled with secondhand furniture and small plants I've managed to keep alive. It's not fancy, but it's mine. I also started therapy, and it's been life-changing. For so long, I felt guilty for breaking up my family, like I was the reason everything fell apart. I carried the weight of being called selfish by Carla, of my dad's anger and disappointment, of watching those kids be separated and placed into new homes. Therapy helped me untangle those feelings and see the truth. I wasn't selfish. I was a scared, overburdened young woman who did what no one else had the courage to do. I protected children when the adults who were supposed to love them the most refused to step up. That's not selfishness. That's survival. The other night, I got a letter in the mail. It wasn't typed or sent in a fancy envelope, just a piece of notebook paper folded in half. It was from Mason. In shaky kid handwriting, he wrote, "Thank you for taking care of us when Mom didn't. I love you." I read that letter sitting at my small kitchen table, and tears rolled down my cheeks before I even realized I was crying. I bought a simple frame for it the next day and placed it on my desk. It's not just a piece of paper, it's proof. Proof that I made the right choices, even when everyone else told me I was wrong. Proof that the kids I stayed up with, fed on my last few dollars, and protected when I was barely an adult myself, remember that I tried. Sometimes I wonder if my dad will ever forgive himself for all of it, or if Carla even thinks about the consequences of her choices. I don't think I'll ever get an answer to that, and I've learned to stop waiting for one. I've accepted that I can't save everyone. I couldn't save my dad from his grief, and I couldn't save Carla from herself. What I could do, and what I did, was protect myself and the people who deserved it. I learned that setting boundaries doesn't make me cruel, it makes me strong. People still whisper about me in my old neighborhood. I know there are those who think I broke up the family by getting CPS involved. I used to obsess over that, wondering if I should have done things differently, but that letter from Mason silenced every doubt I had left. I didn't break the family, I exposed what was already broken. I walked away from the chaos and built something better. I created a life where I'm not constantly on edge, where I can sleep through the night without worrying that someone is about to knock on my door and drop their kids off on me. If being that girl, the one who refused to silently carry everyone else's problems, makes me the selfish daughter, then I'll wear that label proudly. Because selfish or not, I know I did the right thing. And I'll never let anyone make me feel guilty for saving myself and for saving them too.